Good morning, everyone. Good morning. This is one of those, it's a friends meeting and these are friends. So it's nice to have you all here today. And I usually do a intro on Tuesdays with as to where we come from on that topic. I think it has to be for Rudy and for Debbie, who's here today visiting, but everybody else knows the spiel that this goes back to a 1990s book, Tuesdays with Maury, which was a wonderful book. I don't know if you haven't had a chance, it often shows up in our book sales, so you ought to pick up a copy then, and in paperback for only 50 cents. There's our advertisement for the day. But a great book because it talks about that continuing education. It's a part of our adult years, that it doesn't stop when we're 18 or 21 or 25 or whatever the case might be, but continues on throughout our lives. And that's the purpose of our Tuesday lecture series, as we have it on the third Tuesday of every month, and excited about the topic we have for today. We're pleased to have with us Tuesdays with Rudy Socha, and he's our speaker for today with a group called, I just lost it here on my sheet, Wounded Nature Working Veterans, a wonderful group. And Rudy is a military veteran, having served with the U.S. Marine Corps. Once a Marine, always a Marine. Is that the right phrase? I got it right? I got it. CEO of Wounded Nature Working Veterans, a U.S. Coast Guard licensed boat captain, more than 20 years of management experience in launching successful companies. His launches occur ahead of schedule and under budget. I'll vote for him for president. Anybody else want to? 20 plus years of assisting boys and girls clubs of Cleveland, where he came from the area of Ohio. Good to have him from up there, down here now. And last 5 years, he served as the president of the Boys and Girls Club Alumni Association. In 2003, he and Carolyn Butler Darrow co-authored a book titled Above and Beyond, profiling 88 former Marines who are successful in the civilian world. Royalties from the book sales were paid directly to 7 Marine Corps-related nonprofit organizations. He is passionate about, which you'll hear, about cleaning up rural and hard-to-access beaches, tidal marshes, and coastlines in wildlife-critical areas. He works hard to keep focused on the real difference in increasing America's seafood stocks and coastal wildlife populations. Join me in welcoming Rudy Socha.
Thank you. Thank you. I'm going to wander a little, and I'll talk about a number of subjects related to what we do. First of all, I'll start with the genesis, since Chris brought this up earlier, as to why I ended up getting involved with this. I'd spent a lot of time going to beaches on vacations up and down the East Coast, and I thought the beaches were fairly clean. Yes, the tourists leave some trash, they leave their cigarette butts there, whatever. But I saw that there was increasing populations in wildlife centers and wildlife rescue centers. And so I started spending time asking some of the rescuers and their directors why this was occurring. I didn't see anything that would cause it. And they said, well, you know, the wildlife doesn't live on the beach. The wildlife lives out in the tidal marshes. They live in the areas away from the humans. It's the humans that are out on these public beaches. And when you translate that to South Carolina, which is where we're at now, South Carolina has 2,850 tidal coastal miles. Of that, 141 miles of that are the public beaches, Myrtle Beach, Folly Beach, Beaufort, Hilton Head, whatever. And 100% of the cleanup funding for the state goes to those public beaches. So that means, and I understand it because that's the economic business engine for the state. That's tourism dollars, tourism taxes, et cetera. A lot of payroll taxes involved in that. But that also means the other 2,800 miles is totally neglected in being cleaned up. Most of the marshes, when you drive by in your boat or drive by in a car, you see the grass and it looks pristine. But what happens is with each and every storm, it'll break up some of the docks, and then it pushes the wood into the marshes. And then with every king tide or high tide, it'll lift that wood and push it a little further back in the marsh. Then it drops down behind that marsh grass as low tide hits, and it's laying on the ground. The grass is this high, and the debris laying there on the ground. Most of the treated wood, if it's old treated wood, it contains creosote and it contains arsenic. If you take a piece of 2 by 12 by 12 foot long wood that's coated with creosote and arsenic, some of the old wood, it contains enough arsenic in it to kill 250 adults. What happens is the seafood populations along the coastal area of the United States has decreased dramatically. It's not due to overfishing. The nurseries that are out there have been contaminated a lot over the years, and they remain contaminated just due to the amount of debris that's sitting in there. A lot of this old dock wood that's sitting in there with the creosote. Now, I don't know if you guys know what creosote is. It's basically tar. I'm sure some of you know. It'll burn your arms if you carry it out and you leave it on it. It's got kind of an acid touch to it, and then they soak the wood in arsenic. The old technique was you soak the wood in arsenic so that the bugs wouldn't eat up the wood, and telephone poles would be a good example. And then after the wood soaked in the arsenic for a period of time, and it would be almost pure liquid arsenic, then they would coat it with creosote to protect it from the weather and to kind of preserve the wood. So you have two poisons that are very intense there. And the creosote, or the tar from the creosote, if you see it setting out in a tidal marsh, it will still give off a gleam as the product kind of dissipates going out. Now, it doesn't seem to affect crabs and shellfish from the standpoint of really decreasing their populations too much in the tidal marsh, but what you won't find in there that's very sensitive are baby shrimp and baby fish, because their gills are very sensitive to the arsenic and to the creosote. And so we started spending time going back into these marshes and pulling this debris out. And another thing that we found a lot of was tires. And used tires were used on boats, and almost every commercial boat, instead of having fenders back in the days, they just went to the local auto shop and got some tires, and they would just put bolts in the side of their boats and put them all around on the side. When the tires got pretty worn out at the docks and tore up, they just take them off, throw them in the marsh, and then bolt a new tire onto the side of the boats. And that was just the old way of doing things. Well, a lot of those old tires now reside in the tidal marshes as well. The amount of debris that actually washes down a river or that blows off a boat is pretty small weight-wise and composition-wise in comparison to all this other debris that happens to be out there. It's much heavier and much harder to remove. As we started removing these debris items, we realized that there were some other problems that existed when we got into the wildlife areas where not a lot of people were going that had been neglected. There's a lot of groups that go out and they call it a beach sweep, and they give everyone a plastic trash bag, and then they walk down the beach and they pick up a straw and cigarette butts and the plastic bottles. What they don't pick up is the pieces of treated wood that have washed up on the front side, and what was not being removed was crab traps. And up until about 6 years ago, when we started working with DNR on this, a lot of baby sea turtles were being lost due to crab traps that washed up on the front side of the beaches, like on Cedar Island and North Island, South Island. you'd see the crab traps, they're half buried in the sand. They'd been there for quite a while. Well, what would happen is mama sea turtle would go up this way, lay a nest, the babies would hatch, they'd run down towards the ocean, and then this crab trap would be there. When the baby sea turtles could see the ocean on the other side, they had no life experience. They just sit there and keep going like this, trying to get at the ocean until either a ghost crab or a seagull came along and ate them. Or else, something else, the raccoons and the wild pigs would eat a few too. And so by the time we were done removing orphan crab traps out there on the front side of these wildlife designated beaches, we had removed a total of 2,800. And some of them were reused by DNR, and they were filled with oyster shells and used as oyster beds. Most of them, they were pretty well rusted out or just destroyed just from being out there so long that we just ended up sending them to the landfill. Right now, if you go to any of the wildlife designated areas, DNR seems to be doing a pretty good job of keeping up with them, and it's rare now that you'll see an orphan crab trap. The other thing that was happening in these wildlife centers was, even though they had people doing beach sweeps, they were walking down the beach in the warm months, and because it was seabird nesting season or sea turtle nesting season, they wanted to keep the volunteers down on the beach area, so no one was going up looking over the dunes. Well, a lot of trash had accumulated on the front side of these beaches right over the dunes because they didn't want anybody in there because they might step on an egg or whatever. So they started scheduling some cleanups that would be over the winter months where it wouldn't end up affecting wildlife. And as a result, a lot more debris started being removed from these areas. And I will say this, DNR happens to, now they've, 6 years ago, 5 years ago, they were not removing much debris, and there was a reason for that. If they were working on a grant for oysters, or if they were working on a grant for bird counts, they didn't feel they could use their boats to go out and do debris removal. Even though they walked past 3 or 4 pieces of treated wood, 5 tires, whatever, they would leave it laying there because they didn't think they could use their time, their money, or the boats to go ahead and bring that stuff back. And so now they do. And I got a question, since everyone's from the Georgetown area, do you know Jason Dozier? Does anybody know him? Dozier, yep. He's a fantastic guy, and he's responsible for abandoned and derelict boats in this area. And we've worked with him. He's been working very hard, very intensely, and he's accomplished a tremendous amount with almost no resources in this area. The day that we worked with him, we had a barge come down from Myrtle Beach, and we got two shrimp boats that were on the other side. As you look across from the restaurants downtown, you got that island there. On the other side of that island, there were 2 shrimp boats that had been sunk there forever. As we went when we were first out scouting, we discovered at low tide there actually happened to be a sailboat sitting there right between the 2 shrimp boats. And then we ended up getting another boat out of downtown that day as well. Some woman had been living on the boat. She was willing to give it up. It had not been registered in her name. She had it for about 6 years. It was a constant problem from drifting, hitting other boats, etc. Well, she had collected a lot of stuff. She had a little cocoon inside. All the rest of it was filled up like a hoarder would with old clothing, food, whatever. And then the top had stuff tied onto the top of it. Well, we took it down by the boat ramp downtown, and then as we were breaking it apart and pulling it out, there were actually rats running off. And I happened to ride on that boat from downtown over because it had a problem with the rudder and we were towing it with 2 small boats to get it out. And it was also filled with fleas, which were a pain in the butt as I was riding the boat over. But that brings us to the genesis of these abandoned boats. What happens is someone has a boat in a marina, or not even in a marina, maybe just anchored somewhere, and they no longer spend time with it, or they don't have the time to spend with it. It no longer runs, and it costs maybe $1,000, $2,000 to get the motor running, or it no longer has sails on it, the sails are ripped, whatever. And so they don't have the expense or the desire to fix the boat. So they don't want to dispose of the boat because getting it out of the water, sending it to the landfill, they feel is going to cost a lot of money, especially if it's a sailboat. So what they do is they list it as a project boat for either $100, $1, or free. And generally the people that take these boats have never sailed before in their life. And I'm using sailboats because that probably represents 70% of the boats we get rid of. And they've never sailed a day before in their life, but what they're looking for is a place to live. And most of them, well, I won't say most of them, but a lot of them are either felons or pedophiles that can't rent on land. And they're a real pain in the butt to deal with. They don't have a full-time job, so as the law enforcement officers like Jason go out and they visit them, and it doesn't do them any good to write tickets because when they appear in front of the judge, they tell the judge that they have no income, and the judge sees no reason to put them in jail or anything else that would deter their behavior. So you see the same boats being the same problem over and over and over again, just because there's no way of rectifying the situation, usually until they're willing to give the boat up. And then once they're willing to give the boat up, they have no money to actually pay for that boat to go to the landfill. But by that time, they've generally lived on the boat for a couple of years. The motor is not run. Sails are, usually non-existent, or if they are existent, they're moldy and they're tore up, or they have rats living inside them that have chewed them up. And then the boat has not been pumped out, and it contains old gas and old oil inside the boat. In order to get a boat into the landfill, the oil and gas has to be pumped out of it. Most of the rest can stay. But usually, I won't say usually, probably half the time what happens is a storm will come along and that boat will get swamped, either because it's not anchored right, or there's a slow leak either around the rudder or in the hull somewhere. And so the boat gets swamped and then it sinks. And then we've got to, figure out a way to get the boat floated and then sent to the landfill. And what happens is these people have everything that they've collected inside the boat. So as we go to once we get the boat floated to the surface, which usually involves a diver and some airbags, then we've got to pump the boat out. And when they've got a lot of stuff inside the boat, then what happens is it clogs our pumps constantly. So it takes a lot longer than it should. The average boat that we end up pulling out weighs between 4 and 5 tons. It's usually it was usually manufactured 1960, 1970, or 1980, which makes it 50 years or older. But that 4 or 5 tons represents 5 tons of fiberglass, of the engine components, which, the metal itself is not bad for the environment. We take old steel boats, once we clean them out, and we send them offshore and we use them for reefs. Well, DNR does, but you've got to get the oil out of it. And, you don't want the oil in the marsh are in your waterways, and the gas has to be pumped out of it. Sewage tanks are usually full on them, and the boat's totally non-functional. But what happens with fiberglass boats is they start breaking apart, and the fiberglass starts breaking apart. And all fiberglass is glass strands that are encapsulated with plastic. So you're getting plastic and glass into the environment, into your crab beds, into your oyster beds out there. Usually there's no consistency between the fiberglass between manufacturers. Every manufacturer has their own recipe for fiberglass that they use. And then some manufacturers will cast a solid fiberglass boat hull on some of the smaller boats, but most of them will start with a wood form, and then they encapsulate that. They coat it with plastic and fiberglass on the outside. So we've become, as a result of being out there, we're out there, we don't wait for Earth Day or Ocean Day or whatever, as we have money available to us, and depending on what's awaiting us out there, we work year round on getting debris out of the tidal marshes. And so far as of today, we've gotten about 140 boats out, close to 50 full-size dumpsters of treated wood and other debris. And we're talking 30-yard dumpsters, which are the big ones. And then just a lot of tires. I forget what the count is on tires as well. Tires is kind of a funny thing. The car tire, might weigh 30 pounds. But when we get into these industrial tires that they put on the fishing boats and the shrimp boats as fenders, they weigh hundreds of pounds, and they're a real beast to get out of the water. But tires do emit petroleum in very small amounts. Florida, I think it was about 25 years ago, figured they would take care of their scrap tire problem and went to set up some tire reefs. And what they found out was it polluted the water right around it, and then it reduced the fish populations for that area for game fish. And they spent, I think it was $6 million pulling those reefs back out, and then replacing it with concrete blocks out there that would represent the reefs. Right now, we finally have all the state entities working together on getting these boats out of the water. There wasn't much cohesion before, and I think right now DNR has a great officer running the program for the state, which is Michael Paul Thomas. He's Jason's boss. And he has a representative from DNR in each of the counties going down that we work with specifically. DNR has law enforcement authority over the regulations that apply to derelict and abandoned boats. But like I said, they have a problem with judges and actually being able to write tickets and enforcement action, but they are out there on a regular basis, and they're fantastic partners for us. Then DHEC has authority over the tidal marshes and mooring balls themselves. Any mooring ball that's out there that does not have a DHEC number in the owner's name is essentially an illegal mooring ball. In the state of South Carolina, you cannot just go out there on the water and plant your own mooring ball and say, this piece of waterway is mine now, and I'm gonna park my boat there whenever I want to. You can't claim the waterway as your own. And which a lot of people have done, and over the years, just because it wasn't enforced by anybody. DHEC has no law enforcement authority over it, But what they do have is they take it administratively. They start sending off letters, and then eventually they work their way into the courts if someone is unwilling to remove their illegal mooring ball. The problem is DHEC neglected this for such a long time, and now they're trying to fit it into their workload, and it's never been part of their workload before. And they're kind of warming up to working on it, is probably the best way of putting it, but they don't have the same enthusiasm for doing it as DNR does. Then we have, which is just now getting involved, is there is an office in Columbia. It's called the Office of Resiliency for the state. And they're primarily responsible for dealing with FEMA and disasters for the state. Ben Duncan is the director's name, and he's been a state employee for a number of years. He understands the bureaucracy. We just invited him and the governor about 2 months ago down to Charleston to actually go out and look at derelict boats and to give them a firsthand look. And we took them out to see some boats that were unregistered. We took them out to see some commercial boats. And we have a place down by Charleston, it's called Shipyard Creek. There's a shrimp boat sunk there. There's a houseboat sunk there. There were 2 derelict boats there. There was a sunken sailboat laying on its side. There's a big steel tugboat that was abandoned there in 1947, and it's still there. There's an old barge abandoned about the same time. And so there's never been money allocated by the state before. So we finally put together a state funding request to handle all the abandoned boats up and down the coast. If that funding request is granted and implemented, South Carolina will be the first state up and down the coast that will have all of its abandoned boats gone. I mean, as you drive down I-95, you look on the left right around exit 49 on Cathead Creek, you can see an old commercial fishing boat right there, right off of 95 with a tree growing out of it because it's been there so long. You go downtown Savannah, there's a river over there, and you can see a boat up on the shoreline that's been there for a long time. Florida they have about 2,000 boats. They have the money for it, but they have a lot of bureaucracy, and it's a weird process that a county has to go through per boat, including suing the owner for the removal cost in civil court, and most counties don't want to allocate people or manpower to do it and before they can get reimbursed for removing a boat. And so that's why the problem remains within their counties down there. North of us is North Carolina. They just received funding to get rid of about 400 boats. They started on it about 6-7 months ago. I was up there for the first boat being removed, and it's a bid award process, and the guy who got the first boat had no experience getting rid of boats, but he had experience in marine construction. He just had the wrong equipment on the job, and he jammed up a boat ramp trying to pull a boat out with a bobcat, and he got the boat up just far enough to get it stuck there, and then he was trying to rip it apart with a bobcat, and it just wasn't big enough given it was a 50-foot cabin cruiser. So he just, once we got there and got some chains on it and got some other equipment, it was pretty easy to get it out of the way. And he's going to do very well. He'll probably get more contracts, and he's a good guy, and he'll work well for the state moving forward. But they're working on their problem, and hopefully South Carolina will be able to do a better job with funding as we go forward. It's just been an issue that's been neglected for so long, just like orphan crab traps were. And I was just trying to think, we also have other agencies involved. Coast Guard probably gets the most calls on this whenever there's an abandoned boat. Coast Guard has no authority over it unless it's blocking shipping lane traffic or the intercoastal. I mean, other than that, and to be honest with you, they can't move a boat. So what they've done in the past where the boats represented like shrimp boats that have sunk, if it's represented an environmental threat, they've actually lifted the boat up out of the water with their equipment, pumped the fuel out of it, but they've had to put the boat right back down where they got it from. And that's just the way the regulations are written that they have to abide by. And, we work with the Coast Guard. Once they get their calls, they call us. The boat we got rid of last week, we had 2 Coast Guard officers that had just transferred in. We took them out to get them mudded up. I put them on the pumps to make sure that they got some mud on themselves before they went back. And we were able to get the boat out. Coast Guard, they have many responsibilities. They're now under Homeland Security. And so it's kind of weird for their situation. They try to pass everything over to either the state or the local level to handle. And they have many things on their plate and maybe not enough employees to handle all of them. And they're out there all the time. If we need help or anyone needs help, they're out there. And doesn't matter what the weather is, they'll be out there for you. And then you have the local law enforcement groups. And over in the Charleston area between Charleston Harbor Police and Folly Police, they've been able to enforce the laws within their cities, and combined they've gotten about 40 boats out themselves just by being very persistent. Folly was probably the most persistent, and then Spencer Wetmore, who's their state representative, and she's a Democrat, and we brought her along with the governor, who's a Republican, by the way, when he came down to look at the derelict boats, just because she had experience with it, but they get along fine. And Spencer wrote a law, and Jason's working on getting that law implemented here for Georgetown, that if you're going to anchor your boat out there and not use a marina, there's certain criteria you have to have, including, and most importantly, is insurance. I mean, the city or the county should not be responsible for getting your boat up if it sinks. I mean, that suddenly becomes a taxpayer liability. And, for most people, if they have a trailer and they have their boat on a trailer, or they have a trailer that can get their boat out of the water, the tipping fees at a landfill is about $50 a ton. So you're talking, for most of the boats that are 30 feet and under, it's not going to exceed $200 to go get rid of the boat. And I understand that's a huge amount for someone who's not working, that's living aboard a boat. But, I happen to know that they're making money because we've caught them before by stealing things and then selling those things that they've stolen. It's just that the money's not being spent on what it should be spent on. So that's kind of an overview, and I know each one of you has probably came here today because you had some question about derelict boats and, our abandoned boats. I know there's still a number of boats out here in the harbor area, in the downtown area. I know about 3 or 4 of them that are filled with junk actually belong to one of the guys who owns I don't know if he owns a marina or he owns land over there, and he seems to use these boats as storage. I know he doesn't have those boats insured, and I know if they sink, they're going to really create a mess downtown. The problem is when you live in the area that you enforce the law, you don't want to create a ton of enemies. And so Jason walks that fine line of trying to get things done, and he's done a lot here. He's gotten more than 20 boats out of your area. And, you know, he's working each and every day on it, and he's also working on trying to get more law enforcement authority, a little more of a bite to prevent future problems from happening here. So,
Rudy, could you tell us a little bit more about the history of Wounded Nature Working Veterans? The organization itself.
Okay. We set this up, as I said, because we realized that the tidal marshes were not being cleaned. One of the things that I realized in dealing with different nonprofits and in dealing with Wounded Nature is that many of the people very far on the left view the military establishment as a takeaway from inner city programs, that the military budget's so large that they feel if we could shrink the military budget, we'd have more money for inner city programs, we'd have more money for environmental programs, etc. And so therefore, the military's kind of the enemy. And that's kind of a view that's been expressed several times to me. And I do understand it. You know, I don't think that's exactly how Congress works in allocating money, that if you took money away from the military community or the veterans community or the VA hospitals, that it would automatically go to inner city programs, or that it would automatically go to environmental programs, or that it would go to whatever you want it to go to. But they seem to feel that way. So for many of the groups, they do not welcome people that wear, you know, their veterans hats, as we see over here, or they wear their, you know, their T-shirts with, you know, showing Army or Marines or whatever it happens to be, Navy. And so then, you know, there will always be 2 or 3 people that will end up making comments that will say, you know, if we didn't allocate so much money for the military, we'd have money for environmental issues. Within our group, I will say we have a lot of people that are very far on the left, and we have some that are very far on the right. We do not just work with veterans, we work with active duty military personnel, and then we work with just regular volunteers. The thing about our organization is we really don't need more volunteers. Funding's what we need, and the reason for that is most of the places that we go into require a boat to get there. So it becomes a logistics issue where we have to get the volunteers who can get into a marsh with soft mud, get them in there, get all this debris pulled up to the shoreline, get the debris loaded on the boat, then get the volunteers loaded and get everything back to shore. If we're removing a boat, unless you have experience getting a boat, you know, we've had sailboats flip over on their side for us, roll over, whatever the case happens to be, you're going to get hurt. And we've been very lucky, knock on wood. We've been doing this for close to 13 years now, and we've not had an injury yet. And that includes getting into all these marshes and getting all these boats out. You know, we try to refrain from doing anything that's going to end up injuring people. And then, you know, we'll wait on some things until we can get the right equipment, the right people involved. So we have many more people than we need for most cleanups. And the reason for that is a lot of people consider it sort of a badge of honor, proving themselves again by being able to go out into a marsh on a January day when it's only 20-some degrees. And as I tell the volunteers, when they show up, I said, I know you guys will be complaining this morning about the wind and the rain, but by afternoon, you're going to be bragging that you were out in the elements this morning and everything that we were able to go ahead and get accomplished. And so that's kind of the veterans angle. My number two, he retired about 3 years ago as he retired from the Army, and his primary MOS when he was in was an Apache helicopter pilot. Then we have a part-timer here in this area, Jerry Edwards, who does our website, and he retired from the Army as well, and his vehicle was blown up by an IED, and he has a number of health issues, and so he works for us part-time maintaining the website. So, any other questions about that?
Question is, can anything be done about boats that you know are going to become derelict but are not derelict yet?
We try to work on them, and I'll tell you we kind of fill a spot between law enforcement and DHEC and whatever. They're all government bureaucracies, and they have to abide by their rules. So if Jason goes out to visit someone who's a real headache, and he's visited the guy 5 times, and the guy has no money to pay for his boat being removed, then for time number 6, it might involve me going out or me calling a guy and Jason passing his information over to me, and I'll ask him if he'll surrender the title to us. And same thing happens with some boats out there we know they're owned by felons that might have a warrant on them. It's the same as entering a person's house. If Jason or any of the other DNR officers go knock on a boat and the guy doesn't answer his door or his boat or pop his head up, they can't do anything to him or, quiz him, get his ID, anything. And so if we go out there, we can, I just walk on the boat and, and we'll climb up on it and knock on his door and talk to the guy and see if I can get his phone number or name and find out what the situation is. And then, we determine, and I will tell you this, DNR's main interest is not spending time in court with these people that have problem boats. It's to get the problem boats out of the water. And so if we can find a way to do it without going through court, that's the way that we actually want to handle it, because going to court just delays getting that boat out of the water, which means there's a chance that a storm's going to come along and it's going to sink that boat. So we'd like to if we know it's a problem boat, we start working on it, especially if the boat's listing. We can tell, and there's some, like the sailboat I talked about before, they had the rats and the fleas in it. That boat had to have been pumped out multiple times before the woman finally surrendered her boat. And it took a lot of contact by Jason, with her to do that. But she was a woman that if she went to court, if Jason wrote her a ticket, there was nothing the court could do. They weren't going to take her home away. And at the same token, a fine wouldn't do any good because she couldn't pay it. And they weren't going to put her in jail. So that's the situation. So it's a matter of convincing some of these people. But if we can get some of the new regulations approved here in the Georgetown, both county and city area, then I think we can get rid of some of the boats. And some of the boats, we don't have problem individuals living on the boat, like the 3 boats down at that end of downtown that the landowner owns, that he just stores garbage on it. I mean, it's stuff he'll never sell. He just hoards junk on a boat and parks it right off his property. And he's got 3 of them anchored out there. And if you saw these boats, you know that they don't run. I think 1 or 2 of them don't even have sails on them. I don't know who this guy is, But I know that DNR's talked to him a number of times, and he's very uncooperative when it comes to those boats. But if he's required to have insurance on those boats to be out there in order for them to be in Georgetown waters, then I think they'll end up making a difference.
What budget year is the money proposed for that you're trying to get from the state?
We should know, actually it's not, NOAA's working on this with us, and so this would be NOAA funds that would be approved either in January or February, and then the funding would actually happen as the new budget year starts in 2023, which would be October 1st, the money would drop into the state budget, which would give us 9 months essentially to make sure everything's set up to go ahead and award contracts and get the rest of the boats out.
And you mentioned the county and the city. What do they need to do besides give it approval?
That's it. Jason has the proposal in front of him right now, and Jason spent a lot of time talking to county and city leaders. I really don't know exactly where that stands in the process at this point in time. I know that Charleston Harbor Police is duplicating. They're doing the same thing in Charleston. Folly Beach was the first one to implement it, and it worked very well there. So.
I'm sorry.
I was just wondering, what percentage of your efforts are devoted to the inland waters or the estuaries? Like when you go down to No Man's Friend or Mother Norton, because I run across derelict boats all the time, and there they sit for months, years on end.
I hope we have them on our inventory list, and I left some brochures there. We'd like to know where they're at to make sure that they are on our inventory list. We got, I believe we got all of them up in Horry County. We went all the way up the Waccamaw River up into Conway to get them, but we got the boats that were sitting that the tour boats used to go past all the time right there by Little River and the Intercoastal. There was a shrimp boat there and 3 sailboats. And you know, as you start your tour up there, it's the first thing you saw for South Carolina waterways was 4 derelict boats. And all of those are gone. Now we do understand 2 more abandoned boats are up there, but they have once again, Joel's the DNR officer for that area. And Joel's pretty diligent up there, and he'll end up staying on it. And they'll come out of the water one way or another.
So if I run across a derelict boat, like in Mother Norton, there's a boat that's been there for probably 8 or 9 months, I just send you the GPS coordinates?
Send the GPS coordinates. We'd like a picture of the boat would be great. And if there's any registration number on it. And then our routine is, if you send that by email, our routine is we then pass it on to DNR, and DNR will clear the boat, which means they will end up contacting the last known owner of the boat. But, you know, since this has been neglected so much, you know, there were 2 boats on the backside of Isle Palms, which is a very wealthy community down in the Charleston area. And I was out there with another DNR officer, and we ran the boat registration numbers. Last time the boats had been registered was 31 years ago. So they were pre-Hugo boats that had been in the tidal marsh. And then we've got 7 boats just north of Goat Island, which is up in the same area. It's been there for a long time. And, you know, there just isn't money to get them all out right now. And we do not receive any government grants at all. We rely primarily on donations from companies and then donated in-kind services. People donating their barges and cranes and dumpsters and whatever we need, depending on the boat and where it resides.
You do anything with seawalls and bulkheads that have deteriorated?
No, We got more than enough on our plate right now, and
More volunteers.
that needs to get out. That's a whole different ballgame there. That affects property values rather than actually impacting wildlife, I think. And you had something else?
I was gonna salute Jason Dozier. He has done an excellent job the last several years, he and DNR. And unfortunately, it's a continuing process.
Yes.
They'll pull out 3 or 4, a year later, there are 2 or 3 more to replace it. And we have individuals who assist and are responsible for illegal moorings, helping these people find an anchorage someplace, and unfortunately, it just never ends.
You're right. And, many times, let me just put it this way, Jason has to be very polite when he talks to these people because he's a state employee. I'm not. And so if it will do any good for me to talk to him, I generally tell him, that one of the things, I generally tell them it's not very respectful of your neighbors or the waterways if you are a true boater, or, some of these people, like this guy who owns the marina or whatever in hell he owns up there at that end, it has the 3 junk boats on the water. You would think he would care more about the waterways, and he doesn't. And then the guy who lives on those boats right across from downtown, he's got that old houseboat where he's got all the crap stored on it. And
Another one 2 weeks ago.
yeah, and another boat down there. He's one the judge won't punish, and he lives on the water and really doesn't care much about, that. And most of these guys, you got to remember, they don't have trash pickup. They don't have sewage hookup. And so what they're doing each and every day is they use a 5-gallon bucket inside that serves as both trash and a toilet, and then they dump it every single night. And so what you do is within a small area, especially where that guy lives, where his houseboat is, he's right up against the bank. So he dumps it on the other side so that downtown people don't see him do it. So you've got no flush factor of the tide affecting it. So you've got this accumulation of human waste that's on the other side of the boat there. And, DHEC, there is no allowance for that. I mean, it's totally illegal, but there's not much that can be done. But, we are addressing those people, and we are addressing its situation as well.
Thank you.
So, and it's sometimes we publicly shame people on Facebook as well. If they're on there, and then, a lot of people. The other thing is, whenever we remove a boat, the picture usually looks real good, of the boat. When the cranes got it out of the water, if we're removing the boat intact, and people ask us, why'd we destroy that boat? Well, if you have water that sat in a boat for 2 years or 5 years, regardless of what the outside of the boat looks like, the inside of that boat's going to have decayed wood. The wood's going to swell just from the water soaking into it. And then you're going to have a lot of mold and other problems as well. Finding spare parts for a boat that's 50, 60, 70 years old is next to impossible and very, very expensive. So it would cost many more times the value of the boat to restore it than it would cost if you were just to buy a new boat out there. And you really can't restore these old boats that have held water for a long time.
Rudy, you and I had talked about the debris in the creek at Pawleys after Ian. What's the status with that?
Actually, Pawleys is going, a lot of the debris on the creek side of Pawleys is from private docks. And then there's a lot in the marsh as well. Pawleys was going to meet with FEMA tomorrow. And I'm not real optimistic that they're going to get any more funds. FEMA is reimbursing them for the cleanup on the front side of their island, where they got most of the debris from the big dock washing away. And that big dock was not owned by the town, that was privately owned. And I don't know whether or not they had insurance. But on the backside, on the creek side, what will happen is a funding request will be submitted if FEMA doesn't pay for that, and it'll probably take a year to get funded then before all that debris could be pulled out of the backside on the creek side. The city has no emergency management funds, and the state has no money allocated for marine debris items. And so at this point they don't. And so money has to be allocated either by the state or by NOAA, and NOAA has no emergency management funds. We just talked to them yesterday about it. So that's where it stands, but you had a question.
Yeah, first, thank you for your service and for this ongoing service.
Thank you.
It's so important. I was wondering if you ever been contacted or contacted an environmental agency about doing a study into the ecological impact of these derelict boats and the treated lumber in the areas, because I was thinking that might really light a fire into helping the funding.
I understand there's a number of studies out there on treated wood and stuff. What I was told that a number of years ago is that the timber industry in South Carolina is much more powerful than the commercial fishing industry. And so the treated wood affects the commercial fishing industry and future fish stocks, but the timber industry, International Paper, and all these other companies have much more money that they allocate, and they don't want to pay for cleaning up past sins of 30, 40, 50 years ago. And so it's not a focal point, but there are studies out there as to the impact of creosote on fish and wildlife, the impact of arsenic on it. Same thing on tires. Those are the big items. Fiberglass, not so much, but I'd rather spend money getting the boats out than studying the problem. And there's different types of nonprofits. You have an advocacy group, and advocacy groups generally try to get new laws written. Then you have education and outreach nonprofits, which try to inform the public about the problem. And then you have remedial action, which is primarily what we are, and we try to stay focused on. And if we fix the problem, then there's no need for a new law, and there's no need to inform the public about the problem. So, a $20,000 study would probably enable us to get 3 boats out of the water. And we'd really rather not leave a boat sit out there to see what impact it's going to have that's negative on sea life. That's just our opinion, but if you were a research nonprofit or an advocacy group or whatever, you would want to do that, but that just is not what we would want to do, and that's why.
Excellent.
So,
Talking about the lumber,
yeah.
I just attended a meeting where the city of Georgetown is getting funding to start addressing flooding, specifically Orange Street that runs down the water. And they have approval to build a new section of bulkhead that's going to run pretty much from it's a few hundred feet of new bulkhead. My question is, I wonder if that's gonna be lumber or it's gonna be metal bulkhead.
It should either be metal or concrete, to be honest with you, from the standpoint of what's best for the environment. You know, and then also what's going to last the longest. The lumber, you know, nowadays they have reduced the chemical content in treated wood, but there still is a chemical content that affects wildlife negatively. And then railroads and utilities have exemptions, you know, when it comes to chemical content. But once again, you know, concrete or heavy metal, the steel girders or aluminum ones, they're going to last a hell of a lot longer than wood will, that's for sure.
What about the vinyl bulkheads, the hat sections that are made by like North Star and stuff like that?
Yeah.
Do those have a deteriorating effect on the?
I don't think that they've been in use that long. So one of the things I know about plastics, when it's out in the environment for a long time, it becomes brittle. And you know, whether it's sunlight or whether it's sitting underwater, it becomes brittle. And you see that with the plastic that encapsulates the fiberglass, you know, where it starts becoming brittle and it cracks as we go to lift it or as we go to move it.
I know you're ready to close. One last thing, I've noticed around East Bay Park, you know, there's a ditch going around the outside perimeter, and the county will spray that ditch with an insecticide that kills the little fiddler crabs and the other small animals that habitat there. So, you know, that is leaking into the marsh also, which eventually will make its way up to another animal or something that's going to eat that fiddler crab.
Yeah. We do debris removal.
Rudy, thank you very much.
Thank you. Thanks, everyone.
Yeah. I just love, well, as I start talking about our education, but just was so broadened today on a whole new perspective. Indeed, picking up plastic and straws is important, but this indeed broadens our perspective on the environmental issues that we're facing here in Georgetown County. And Rudy, thanks so very much for your presentation and as Dan said, your service, your continuing service. Appreciate that so much. We want to invite you back next month. December, we're going to be having, we don't always have a December Tuesdays with, but we decided this year it's sort of a change of pace or whatever from our Christmas activities. But the third Tuesday is December 20th, and Robert McAllister is going to be here as our speaker, the author of this book, Wooden Ships on Winyaw Bay, and this actually is a topic he's going to be speaking on. This is good wood. But Mac, if you know him, is an excellent speaker and a fun person and a lot of energy and enthusiasm. Mac was the founding curator of the South Carolina Maritime Museum and just a really good fellow and excellent presentation. I know we're in store. Yes?
Will he have his books for sale that we can buy them?
We will have the books for sale, Christmas gifts. And we'll have the books. Thank you for mentioning that. And speaking of the holidays coming up, we do hope that you'll join us for our Yuletide home tour this year. Really excited about that as it'll be taking place on Saturday, December 10th, always the second Saturday. The week after the parade is the way we always schedule it. And this year we're excited. We'll be having our 20th Yuletide home tour. We'll be having 11 homes and quite a number of beautiful homes in the town. None, I think it's just one repeat from last year. But even that one repeat is somebody who did more work on their house since last year. So you can see some more, a lot of great homes, including the Boley home, which we've never had an opportunity to get into. It's been recently renovated, and historic home here in Georgetown. And also the Stuart Parker home is going to be on tour this year, which was his first time under private ownership. And so that should be interesting to see what has happened within that house as well. In addition to that, we'll be having two houses of worship. The Duncan Memorial Methodist Church is going to be a part of the tour, and Temple Beth Elohim. Many people are just always curious and interested to know more, and they've been a wonderful partner to the Friends and a wonderful hospitality welcoming us on that Yuletide home tour. And this year is a special part of our 20th anniversary. What we're doing as well is partnering with museums here in Georgetown in what we're calling Murray Museums. And from 11 o'clock, the tour itself, the home tour is 1 to 5. The Murray Museums is going to be a sort of a pre-event from 11 till 2. And that'll include the Kaminsky House, the County Museum, the South Carolina Maritime Museum, and the Gullah Museum. And what we've asked people there to do at all those museums is give sort of a Reader's Digest teaser to be able to get to see those museums and maybe go back then later for a more extensive visit to the museums. But we're excited about that as a part of the event as well. Tickets are for Friends, members of the Friends group, $20, and for non-members, I don't want to say non-friends, non-members is $25, still very, very good, and that we've kept the price steady and we're not going to increase. So anyway, put that on your schedule. Tickets are available.
Santa's Workshop.
Oh, and thank you. And Santa's Workshop. We have 10 really excellent craftspeople who are going to be here in the library selling, and that's from 10 o'clock in the morning until 3 o'clock in the afternoon. Thank you very much. What else have I forgotten? What else have I forgotten? It's just going to be a really great day, and we hope you'll join us. And it sounds like it's raining outside. Anyway, thank you all for being here. Rudy, Debbie, thank you so much. We appreciate you. And you have some brochures in the back, and if you wish to contribute or information, Rudy, yes.
I did forget to bring up one point on the beach cleanups. One of the things that we do when we put people out in a tidal marsh, if they're not capable of picking up big pieces of treated wood and they're picking up small stuff, we give them burlap bags. And two things happen, the water leaks out of it, but we dump the stuff in the dumpster and we reuse those burlap bags. Beach sweeps per year generate 12 million trash bags, plastic trash bags, going into landfills. So just one small point. But, you know, when volunteers volunteer with us, and then they go volunteer with another cleanup organization, they kind of ask those types of questions. Why are we using plastic bags if we want to get all the plastics off the beach? And, you know, and then the cross-pollination does a lot of good. I just forgot that important point, but that's a lot of plastics being generated.
Thanks, Rudy. And thank you all for being here today. Happy Thanksgiving to everyone.
Thank you. You too.
Yeah.